You clicked on a video titled, "I worked in Amsterdam's red light district for a week." You were probably expecting a gritty documentary featuring cobblestone streets, glowing crimson windows, and a harrowing tale of European underworld survival. I hate to break it to you, but the neon in this story is a $30 RGB ring light from Amazon. The cobblestones are the fossilized pizza crusts littering my studio apartment floor, and the red light district is entirely digital, hosted on a server farm in California. My name is Jane, and up until precisely 3 days ago, I was a tragically traditional participant in the modern economy. I was standing waist deep in a literal sea of final notice bills, student loan statements, and credit card rejections. As a chronic introvert, the mere thought of attending a corporate networking event to beg for a minimum wage data entry job sent my parasympathetic nervous system into a catastrophic tailspin. Then, the glowing rectangle of my television delivered a divine revelation. A news anchor, desperately trying to maintain her journalistic dignity, announced that a 19-year-old girl had just purchased a sprawling mansion in the Hollywood Hills by selling jars of her used bathwater to strangers on the internet. Something inside my highly educated, structurally impoverished brain simply snapped. I looked at my meticulously framed, aggressively expensive university diploma, casually tossed it directly into the trash can, and proudly declared to my empty room that traditional education is a pyramid scheme for the unphotogenic. I immediately ordered a professional-grade ring light with next-day shipping. I was going to pivot into the digital flesh trade. I was going to become a content creator. My grand entrance into this lucrative underworld, however, was less than graceful. In my very first attempt to strike a highly seductive, financially viable pose from my profile picture, I miscalculated my center of gravity, slipped on a rogue slice of pepperoni pizza, and face-planted spectacularly into my own laundry basket. But I am nothing if not a resilient multitasker. The startup phase of my new enterprise required a level of cognitive gymnastics that no university could ever teach. I quickly discovered the fundamental law of the digital red light district. Objective reality is the mortal enemy of revenue. I engineered a highly specific, deceptively glamorous camera angle. Within the tight 30-degree field of view of my webcam, I was a glowing, ethereal goddess lounging in a minimalist, wealthy aesthetic. Just 1 millimeter outside of that frame, however, was a chaotic, apocalyptic wasteland of unwashed clothes, empty instant noodle cups, and my cat, aggressively licking my bare foot. As an introvert, I found a strange, comforting safety in this highly controlled deception. I didn't have to be a real person, I just had to render a profitable illusion. I systematically ran my face through 10 different beauty enhancement applications, aggressively smoothing, contouring, and widening until my digital reflection no longer resembled a human being, but rather an incredibly attractive, hypersymmetrical alien life form. I was finally ready to open for business, fully expecting to drown in requests for traditional, socially acceptable glamour shots. I assumed my primary demographic would be standard, run-of-the-mill, lonely men seeking standard, run-of-the-mill digital affection. The underworld, as it turns out, is infinitely weirder than my wildest macroeconomic calculations could have ever predicted. My inbox did not flood with compliments about my digitally altered cheekbones. Instead, I became the confused warden of a digital zoo, catering to psychological anomalies that modern science hasn't even bothered to name yet. Within my first hour of operation, a man named Bob from Ohio sent me a direct message containing exactly $100. His request was not for a seductive dance or a suggestive photo. Bob paid me $100 to aggressively eat a raw, unpeeled yellow onion on camera while crying real tears. As a multitasker, my brain short-circuited trying to process the return on investment of this interaction. 10 minutes later, another user wired me $200 with a highly specific, legally binding contract. I had to photograph my left elbow, but only while my elbow was wearing a white athletic tube sock. There was no nudity, there was no traditional appeal, there was only the cold, hard, terrifying realization that the human psyche is a fractured, incomprehensible mess. I was no longer an online model. I was an independent researcher mapping the absolute darkest, most confusing corners of the male parasocial consciousness. And business was booming. For a chronic multitasker, this chaotic environment was a bizarrely perfect fit. The dopamine feedback loop of the platform is engineered with the same predatory precision as a casino slot machine. Every time a bizarre request rolled in, accompanied by the sharp Pavlovian notification sound, my brain received a massive hit of synthetic satisfaction. I was simultaneously managing Bob's onion fetish, negotiating the exact thread count of the tube sock for the elbow enthusiast, and mathematically calculating my projected quarterly earnings on a digital spreadsheet. It was absolute cognitive overload, a relentless context-switching marathon that would have hospitalized a normal person. But my brain, wired for chaotic overstimulation, hummed with a sick, frantic energy. From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, I was hacking the tribal instinct for social validation. As an introvert, I had spent my entire life avoiding the terrifying unpredictability of actual human eye contact. Now, safely barricaded behind a glowing screen and a pseudonym, I was commanding the attention and the disposable income of dozens of individuals simultaneously. The power dynamic was entirely inverted. I wasn't the anxious, debt-ridden graduate hiding from the world. I was a digital deity, dispensing highly specific, utterly ridiculous content from my throne of unwashed laundry. I had successfully commodified my own absurdity, and the market was responding with overwhelming, terrifying enthusiasm. But the illusion of passive income is the greatest, most devastating macroeconomic lie of our entire generation. I initially thought this extreme mission was simply a matter of uploading a few geometrically optimized photographs and watching the algorithm organically rain cash upon my digital empire. The underwhelming reality hit me like a bag of wet cement dropped from a very high altitude. This was not a passive investment. It was an excruciating, unrelenting grind of psychological labor. I quickly realized that I wasn't selling images. I was selling the agonizingly demanding illusion of intimacy. I was spending 18 grueling hours a day physically chained to my mechanical keyboard, my retinas burning from the blue light, frantically typing highly customized, emotionally manipulative messages to an absolute army of chronically lonely men named Steve, Kevin, and Brian. My multitasking brain, previously proud of its ability to juggle complex academic theories, was now pushed to the absolute brink of structural collapse. I was maintaining 30 distinct, highly volatile parasocial relationships simultaneously. In one chat window on my primary monitor, I was aggressively validating Kevin's recent, incredibly mediocre promotion at a mid-level regional logistics firm. In another window on my secondary screen, I was literally falling asleep at my desk, my forehead heavily resting on the spacebar, half-consciously typing out, "Yes, babe, I miss you so much. Tip $50 right now, and I'll send you an exclusive high-resolution JPEG of my left earlobe." The dark satire of my daily existence became physically painful to endure. I am constantly forced to compare my economic output with the traditional workforce. My best friend from college is currently a resident physician at a major metropolitan hospital. She spends grueling 12-hour shifts performing emergency cardiopulmonary resuscitation, up to her elbows in actual medical trauma, literally dragging fragile human souls back from the very brink of death. I, on the other hand, spend my 12-hour shifts performing emergency ego resuscitation for middle-aged accountants who haven't successfully held a woman's hand since the late 1990s. Then came the end of the month. The direct deposit officially cleared my bank, and the numbers that violently materialized on my screen hit me with the overwhelming force of a localized nuclear detonation. The visual representation of my newly acquired liquid wealth was fundamentally sickening. I sat alone in my dimly lit room, literally slapping myself across the face with a thick, heavy stack of freshly minted $100 bills, desperately trying to wake up from this late-stage capitalistic fever dream. The comparative economics are a glaring, undeniable indictment of our entire global civilization. A brilliant trauma surgeon spends 10 years in brutal academic and clinical training, accumulating hundreds of thousands of dollars in suffocating debt, just to earn enough to comfortably pay rent and maybe, if they budget carefully, afford a mid-range, heavily depreciating sedan. An aerospace engineer at NASA, a mind literally capable of calculating the complex orbital trajectory of a multi-billion-dollar Mars rover, earns just enough to maintain a modest savings account and buy generic groceries. I, Jane, an introverted, socially anxious shut-in who recently figured out how to cleverly monetize the digital curvature of my big toe, had just generated enough liquid capital to casually purchase a small, politically unstable island nation. At the absolute very least, I possessed the purchasing power to buy out the entire hospital where my best friend works, just to evict the staff and turn the intensive care unit into a heavily stylized, neon-lit content creation studio. Society constantly claims to value intellect, hard work, and scientific innovation. That is a blatant, quantifiable lie. We live in a deeply fractured reality where the brilliant, exhausted scientist who successfully mapped the human genome is fundamentally, mathematically, poorer than a girl who simply knows exactly which slider to pull in a mobile editing app to make her glutes look geometrically impossible. But this digital red light district extracts a heavy, invisible psychological toll. You do not just log off and return to normal society. The extreme mission permanently, irreversibly rewires your cognitive framework. The trauma of the thirst economy bleeds directly into objective reality. I can no longer look at the physical world the same way. When I finally force myself to leave my hermetically sealed apartment to go to the local supermarket to buy heavily processed frozen meals, my brain acts as a predatory radar system, aggressively scanning the crowd. I see a completely normal, mild-mannered man in a beige sweater carefully selecting organic avocados in the produce section, and my immediate intrusive thought is paralyzing. Is that the guy? Is that the anonymous username who wired me $50 last Tuesday to film myself aggressively stomping on a loaf of sourdough bread? Every object, every mundane interaction becomes a potential piece of monetizable content. If I see a standard oscillating desk fan, my spine instinctively arcs into an unnatural, supposedly seductive posture. If I accidentally drop a grape on the kitchen floor, my hyperactive brain immediately calculates the specific, niche monetization strategy of eating it provocatively off the linoleum. I am entirely trapped in a lucrative, inescapable prison of my own perceived marketability. I return to my apartment, now a chaotic, echoing fortress of blinding ring lights, tripods, and towering stacks of shipping boxes filled with obscene designer clothes I will never actually wear outside. I sit down heavily on a massive, ridiculous pile of raw cash that I have lazily piled up in the corner of my bedroom. I am staring blankly at the blank wall opposite me. My eyes are dead, entirely devoid of the spark of human ambition or intellectual curiosity. I reach over to my desk, pick up my fiercely expensive, gold-embossed university diploma, and use the heavy, prestigious parchment to gently dab away a single, pathetic tear rolling down my cheek. People in my comment section are constantly asking me if this lifestyle, if this endless digital hustle is actually worth it. I look down at the mountain of fiat currency beneath me. From a purely fiscal, macroeconomic standpoint, absolutely, it is the most mathematically sound, high-yield decision I have ever made in my entire life. But if you look deeply into my eyes, if you try to search for the vibrant, intellectual soul that once passionately wrote a 70-page master's thesis on market inefficiencies, you will find absolutely nothing. It is gone. It has evaporated into the cloud, traded away from monthly subscription fees and direct deposits. The anticlimax is total, crushing, and absolute. I am incredibly, obscenely rich, and I am completely, utterly empty. I guess I'll see you guys next week when I move to Chicago to become a 1920s-style mobster just to see if organized extortion feels a little more honest than this. The screen abruptly and violently cuts to pitch black. The silence is heavy, broken only by a single, sharp, high-pitched ting from a digital notification, echoing endlessly into the empty void.